Here's the church, and there's the steeple. Open the door, and see all the people.
Since the pandemic, the church my parents and family attend has been recording Sunday morning worship and message earlier in the week, and then the minister will edit and publish them on social media and the website Sunday morning. This past Wednesday we recorded the worship music. I'm one of the 3 singers we have, and my mum is the pianist. While in the middle of recording our first song, we all hear a man yell,
"Stop!"
I look over in the direction it came from, somewhere off the stage to my left, and we finish the song. After we finish the song, one of the other singers goes, "Did you hear that?" And all 5 of us, including our other instrumentalist, my mum and the 3 singers, are like, "Yeah." The saxophone player was suggesting that it was a wrong note he played, or a squeak or something, but none of us were really convinced. Flash forward to this Sunday, and my mum and I watched the service, and we noticed that the noise couldn't have been from the sax because the sax has a microphone and would have been very audible on the video. My mum and I noticed where the 2 of us looked over at the noise and replayed the section a couple of times loudly, and we could hear it, just barely under the music. By far the freakiest thing I've experienced in that church, and none of us will ever be finding ourselves alone in that building again. But there's no way that noise was made from anyone on stage, or the minister off stage. So this happened today at a church I took my grandma to. I haven't been since I was a kid, and I figured it'd be nice to go again. At first, the church seemed very homey. I came from a small town in Kentucky and live in a city now, so it was nice. A lot of people at the church also used to live in Kentucky and still have family there, so it was like a small piece of home here with me. The service was short and simple. They started out with singing and then prayer. After the prayer, they opened the side door and invited God, the Holy Spirit, and angels into the church. Then, they had an evangelist come in and preach a sermon. I was getting weird vibes at this point for whatever reason. I figured it was because I hadn't been in so long, and it had to do with a few personal reasons from my last church experiences. I was sort of zoning out while the evangelist was preaching, and he got really into it and was yelling and putting his arm out towards us. Mid-scream/preaching, his microphone messed up and it sounded very demonic and loud. I know those can mess up, so I didn't even think anything of that. So he changes microphones and carries on. While he's going on again, there's knocking at the side door, and all of a sudden it just flies open. I chalked it up to the wind, but when it opened, the wind was blowing in, and it was a very heavy wind today, heavy enough to push my car slightly on the ride to church. The lights also flickered while he was talking. Everyone kept praising God and saying the Spirit was in the church, and really seemed to enjoy those things happening. After the service was over, the preacher's wife went up to the podium and said while this was happening, she could hear everything upstairs. She also said while she was up there, she saw things running by out of the corner of her eye, and a door had been slammed in her face. Not quite sure what to think of all this. I've never experienced something in a public place like that, and definitely never expected to in a church. Like I said, everyone was really into it happening, and said it was God or angels. I'm an open and spiritual person and have experienced a lot of paranormal, but I didn't feel like whatever that was a good thing. I felt bad vibes right before things started happening up until we left there. I don't think it's a demon or anything that serious. I just wanted to share to see if anything similar has happened to others. When I was 14 years old, I went to a church gathering on Halloween night that was called Hallelujah Night, a Christian alternative to Halloween. My family and I would get there in the afternoon since we'd volunteer to help set up the booths, cakewalk, candy barrels, etc. But I was mostly there to get first dibs on all the candy. After I finished helping with the usual booth I helped set up, I took a seat on a bench near the main sanctuary. It was my favourite place to sit at since I could see the entire lot and, most of all, the beautiful sunset. I pulled out my PSP and was scrolling through some music I had on it when some guy approached me and started a conversation. I've never been a people person, so usually when things like this happen, I keep the conversation short. However, this guy had this weird type of warmth to him, as if he was a friend of mine. As the conversation carried on, I started to ask him if he was new because I hadn't seen him before. He told me that he had been going to this church for years, but left after an incident happened. When I asked him about the incident, he paused, looked at me and said that there's some things people pick up on that they know aren't normal. Also that you should never get curious about things that you know you should leave alone. I had a sort of confused look on my face since I didn't know what he meant at the time. The guy noticed it and said that I would understand once I got older. I looked down at my PSP that I had in my hand still and looked back up, and the guy was gone. I looked around and couldn't find him anywhere in the lot, except for a few people still prepping for Hallelujah Night. It didn't make any sense. Fast forward to a few months later, I was sitting in the main sanctuary before leaving to do my usual volunteer work on the upper floor of the main sanctuary. The upper floor was a daycare center for kids, so at the end of service, volunteers escort the children downstairs and would go into each room, shutting off the lights and making sure no children were still up there. I'll never forget getting up to leave to do my usual duties when the pastor started talking about an upcoming funeral. I looked at the big screens on each side of the main sanctuary, and the face that was of the man I was talking to during Hallelujah Night was there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. To this day, it still seems unreal. I was beyond shook as I made my way out of the main sanctuary and onto the flights of big stairs as I went to the upper floor. Once I made it to the upper floor, another volunteer had confirmed that all the children were escorted downstairs. She noticed that I had looked sort of pale from seeing what I saw in the main sanctuary and asked me if I was okay. I told her it was nothing and proceeded to cut off all the lights on the upper floor as she left downstairs. The upper floor was like a giant hallway with doors on each side and a door at the end of the hallway with a giant window in it. When I came to the last room at the end of the hall, I would always leave the blinds on that big window open since the light always illuminated the dark hallway and made me feel less scared. But as I left the room, I remember feeling panicked. It started freezing and I felt like if I left that room, something was waiting for me in the darkened rooms that was going to jump out and attack me. As I'm trying to muster up the courage to just run for it, I see the small head of a child peek out a couple of doors down. It stayed there for a few seconds and then put its head back in the room. I immediately called out to the child, but no answer. The fear I had a minute ago was gone as I left the last room to go through the illuminated hallway. I made it to the other room in a matter of seconds, cutting on the lights and searching the entire room for the child I saw. But no one was there. I started getting spooked again as I cut off the lights in that room. Then one of the most terrifying things I have ever seen and experienced happened. As I was leaving the room, I looked back at the last room's window, which illuminated the hallway. And out of nowhere, a massive black mass moved in front of the window, almost covering the light completely. It was darker than black, and its outline as it covered the light seemed to be moving. It was enough to scare me to run for my life. I ran the rest of the hallway and down the stairs. I was stopped by one of the ushers who told me not to run, but when I told him what I saw, he looked at me as if I was crazy. Once church was over, I told my parents about what happened on the ride home, and they ended up not believing me since they're skeptics. But I know what I saw that day, and it's something that still scares me to this very day. A little history on the church before we start. This church has been in the same location for nearly 200 years, although the buildings have been updated. You can't go in the church outside of normal operating hours or in small groups without having an experience. I have several stories that I would like to share, but I'll start with the first thing that happened to us. This takes place when we're around 12-13 years old. My friend, David, the custodian's son, and I were at the church helping to set up for an event that was to take place later on in the evening. We weren't alone completely. There was only a handful of people in the building, all of whom were on the ground floor. We were tasked with the mission of retrieving a roll of tape from the second floor, so we take a shortcut through the back of the church that has a very narrow staircase that leads directly into the sanctuary. Our destination is the secretary's office, which is right beside the sanctuary. As we are walking through the sanctuary, we both hear what sounds exactly like a very loud heartbeat coming from no particular area. We run out of the sanctuary before even getting the tape and try to figure out where the sound may have come from, coming up with the conclusion that it was supernatural, considering there is no type of instrument in our church that could have made it, and it was too loud to be coming from the ground floor where everyone else is. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, and we are having a gathering at the church. The area where the previously mentioned staircase is has always been a popular place for the kids to play that is out of the way. So I'm in there with the kids because most of them are my cousins, and I like to pick on them. They were all daring each other to go in the small storage area that is under the staircase. My youngest cousin, who is about 5, crawls out from under the stairs and says that he saw something under them. I ask him what it is, to which he replies, "I saw a beating heart." He's never heard me talk about hearing the heartbeat, so it gave me chills hearing it. I've also never considered him someone to have a wild imagination either. It may have been a coincidence, but with all the experiences I've had in that church, I'm tempted to believe him. So my church is haunted, but there are areas that one might consider a hotspot. These areas are the first floor men's bathroom, the bridal room, which is beside the staircase mentioned in the first story, and the baptismal, which is connected to the third floor bathrooms. After years of being the custodian's son / part-time custodian, my friend has experienced pretty much all the notable spirits and ghosts that are in the church. One of these spirits is a little more than a mild inconvenience, due to the fact that it likes to throw a wet paper towel in an otherwise clean hallway. My friend had told me about this spirit's antics before the story I'm about to tell occurred. My friend and I were around 16 when this happened. My friend was playing basketball with 2 other friends from church one day during summer break. This was midday, so there was no one else at the church, and the church remained locked until we decided to go in. Being the custodian's son, my friend had a key. While taking a break from playing, all 3 of my friends swore that they saw the blinds in one of the windows on the 3rd floor move, like someone had brushed their hand from top to bottom. Me, not being a big basketball person, was not at the church to witness this part. Immediately after they saw the blinds move, they called me to tell me that they were going to go inside to investigate and to see if I was interested in joining. I arrived a few minutes later and we went in. Obviously, being an old building, the church has a tendency to make noises, but some of these are very distinguishable footsteps. One of my buddies puts his phone on the voice recorder and sits it in the first pew of the sanctuary, while we are wandering about the rest of the building, hoping to record some of the noises we keep hearing. We place the phone down and head to the 3rd floor. Nothing paranormal occurs on our first pass, but for some reason, we decide to take the same exact path that we had just taken over and over. In our second go-round is when we notice something strange. There is a broom propped up in the hallway of the men's bathroom on the 3rd floor. This broom was, without a doubt, not there on our first pass. We don't think much of this until our 3rd trek, when we notice that the broom is still in the doorway, but in a different position. The thing about it was that the broom had not slid out at the bottom, but had been stood up. We continue on this path maybe 3 or 4 more times. Maybe three or four more times. Each time the broom has moved to a different position in the same doorway. We decide that it has been long enough, so we go to check on the phone that my buddy had put in the sanctuary. We all go in and begin listening to the recording when we realize, because we couldn't tell what was us and what wasn't. That is until we hear a loud tap that sounded like it was coming from a few pews behind the phone. The tapping gets closer, then one more tap even closer. Finally, there was what sounded exactly like a triple tap on the screen of the phone. After listening to the recording, we decide to check on the broom one more time. As we reach the 3rd floor, there are 2 very obvious things that have changed. 1, the broom is now in a different doorway. And 2, there is a wet paper towel lying in the middle of the hallway, in front of the men's restroom. My friend claims to have seen a reflection that wasn't ours in the window across the hall from us, and that's when we decided that we were done ghost hunting for the day. A couple of years later, and one of my buddies is helping his dad, who is a plumber, renovate one of the bathrooms in the church. As they are headed to the bathroom, my buddy spots a familiar sight. In the middle of the hallway lays a wet paper towel. This story is actually a conglomeration of 3 separate stories. Going to try to keep it short. The first story is about the parsonage that is beside the church. For those of you who may not know, a parsonage is a house close to the church that the pastor lives in. Anyway, at the time that this happened, we had a temporary pastor who had been living in the parsonage for a little over a year. The pastor had a son who was my age and told me and my friend this story. While living in the parsonage, he always had a bad feeling just from being in there. His bedroom was in the basement where this story occurs. One day, our pastor goes to the basement to retrieve something from one of the storage areas. When he opened the door to the storage room, he was chased from the basement by a single crow. How the crow, if that is what it really was, got into the basement and then into a closed room is still a mystery to me. The second takes place in the ground floor bathroom. In this bathroom is a storage closet that has an unfinished floor that is just dirt. Pretty common in basements. This area is occasionally called the portal to hell by some of the kids my age, due to the uneasy feeling you get from being around it. As I was washing my hands, the door to the closet was pulled open fast enough to make wind. Luckily, I was only washing my hands because I was out of that bathroom in a second flat. The third story takes place in the second floor bathroom. This bathroom butts up against the storage/maintenance room. During a gathering at the church, I went to an unoccupied area of the church to do my business, because I'm a gentleman. Anyway, as I was sitting there, I heard a loud scratching sound coming from the cinder block wall right behind my head. Trying to stay calm, I told myself something had tipped over in the maintenance room. And that's what made the noise. I finished up and decided to look into the closet. The door, which was normally locked, opened right up to reveal that there was nothing in the room that had tipped, nor was there anything that could have even produced that noise in the first place. These stories aren't that scary to read, but they were horrifying in the moment. This one actually happened when there were people in the sanctuary during an Easter drama that my church puts on every year. It started with a short wait in the sanctuary because it is a guided walkthrough from garden to tomb, showing the last days of Jesus, ending with the resurrection. While there was a decent group waiting in the sanctuary, one of the glass plates that held a candle in the windowsill was violently flung into the middle of the sanctuary. The candle that it was holding remained in the windowsill. Although it was witnessed by several people, there are still those who chose to believe that things like that just happen sometimes. Another short one, not super spooky. My friend David and I were at the church moving some boxes from the storage room on the third floor for his mum. We were the only ones there at the time. About halfway through moving the boxes, we go outside to sit down for a few minutes. Once we were ready to get back to work, we head back to the doors. These were old wooden doors with manual locks, only to find that they are now locked. At this point, we've had more experiences at this church than what I would assume most people will have in a lifetime. So we take the hint and decide to call it a day. My friend David and I were at his graduation party, and we were telling one of his other friends about some of the strange things that go on at our church. David's friend didn't really believe the stories, so we decided to take him to the church that night, when we knew no one else would be there. We get to the church around 9 p.m, unlock the doors and go in. All the lights are off, so we are going room to room, turning them on as we go. Almost immediately, we all hear footsteps on the floor above us. We finish going through the first floor, and as we are ascending the stairs, we hear the footsteps come to the top of the stairs, which is around a landing halfway up the staircase. In the window on the landing, we can clearly see an outline of what looks like a person. At this point, our friend had decided that he had gotten enough proof to believe our stories and was ready to leave. We are standing there in the parking lot, facing the door, arguing over who's going to have to go back inside and turn all the lights off, when all of a sudden, there are 3 very distinct taps on the nursery window. The nursery is on the second floor, and on the side of the building we were facing. That made the decision about turning the lights out a bit harder. Fun facts about the nursery. Once we got back to David's house, we were telling his mum, the actual custodian of the church, about what had happened, and she told us that she hated having to go into the nursery while she was alone, due to the feeling she got going in there. She also said that the old wooden rocking chair that was there would almost always be rocking when she went in to clean, so she would go clean something else and wait for whoever it was in the rocking chair to finish up. So it's been a while since I posted a story from my church. While talking to my friend about an experience we had, I realized that I have seen an embodiment of one of the spirits from our church, something I had previously thought I hadn't experienced. I was very young when I saw it, so I never put it together until we were talking about something he had seen. He was talking about the time we had been lured into the church by a dark figure in a window, which proceeded to lead us on a wild goose chase through the church. He described the figure he had seen as an average-sized male with no features, just all black. After hearing this, I remembered a time where I was waiting on my parents, who were talking to some people after evening service. Most everyone had gone home at this point, and the lights were turned off on all the floors, except the ground floor. Being the adventurous little kid I was, and not really believing in ghosts, I decided to go to the third floor with all the lights off. As I rounded the steps to the third floor, I saw the silhouette of an all-black man, thanks to the light in the parking lot coming in through the window. I immediately ran back to my parents and told them, but as any good Baptist parents would, they told me that it was just someone from the church. This occurred in the same spot that my friend had seen the figure. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.